Thank everybody for being here. My name is Dr. Karen Wisely. I'm the chair of the History and Philosophy Department. Yeah, sure. Wow. All right, calm down. We are going to have a little presentation here about the rise of fascism. We just thought it was something that we wanted to talk about. A couple of things on your tables before we will clear this up. First of all, we have the announcement of the awards season has arrived at TCC. So there is a paper that has a couple of QR codes on it that will lead you to applying for different awards. And these are, some of them are RSO for Registered Student Organization Leadership Awards, but then there's also academic awards. So if you are in a class, and it doesn't matter if it's like, if it's not your, heart's ambition to be a historian, for example. I'm gonna speak for the historians here today. Is that we don't get a lot of students who want to apply to be the history student of the semester, because everyone thinks that means you have to commit to being a history major or something, and you don't. All you have to do is have taken history classes and done well in them. And if you had some kind of rapport with your instructors and think, hey, they would nominate me, I recommend that you fill out the application and see what happens. Just that's what this is, all right? The other two QR codes, like I said, the blue is for signing in, the red is for the evaluation at the end, and then the third thing on your table are some flyers for future events that we have. 3 of them are movie discussion events where you can watch these movies using Swank Digital Campus on the library website, and then attend a virtual discussion with us. Fridays, every other Friday at 3 p.m. And then on March 11th, Tuesday, March 11th, we are having a speaker come in and talk about the Soviet Army of occupation in the post-World War II era. So that should be a very good talk. He is an expert on that, and there aren't that many of them in the United States because of all the languages that you need to know the Eastern Front of the World War II. Please join us for those things. I guess without further ado, we'll get started on today's presentation. We are going to talk about the rise of fascism. And I think probably a little bit of background information. Because history is all about context. So context for the rise of fascism is World War I was a very brutal, bloody war. Millions, literally millions of people died in that war, and it changed a lot of the map of Europe. Germany was forced to take I don't want to say credit, blame, that's the word, blame, for starting World War I, and they are going to have territory taken away from them, and they are going to be forced to pay reparations. That's going to be harmful once the Great Depression hits, but I have a feeling that one of our speakers is going to cover that, or maybe both of them. All right. What I do want to say is that fascism is going to take root in Europe. It is going to get its beginnings in Italy, and then probably the best known example of it is in Germany, in Nazi Germany. So just a definition of what fascism is. It is a system of government marked by centralization of authority under a dictator, violent suppression of the opposition, and typically a policy of belligerent nationalism and racism. Okay? So there's a couple of things that I want to point out here First of all, it's a dictator that, in both cases of Italy and Germany, will take power legitimately through an election. Okay? And then they will consolidate power under their authority to become a dictator after the election is over. Okay? That's important. Violent suppression of the opposition. This means threatening to imprison anyone who isn't a member of their party, whether it's the fascist party or the Nazi party. Suppressing the media, making sure there's only one version of stories that go out, and that is the official fascist version. And nationalism and racism. And I know a lot of people struggle with nationalism because a lot of us really are, I know it's hard to imagine, but really are proud Americans, right? My friends used to call me Captain America. Among other things. So I want you to understand that patriotism is not nationalism. They are not synonymous. Patriotism is being proud of your nation, but understanding that your nation is not perfect. I study history, and I study some of the worst things that the United States has done, and yet I am possibly one of the most patriotic Americans you've ever met. Talk to me during the Olympics, but not if you're from another country, because I will verbally abuse you. Right? I am a patriotic American. I study the worst things that America has done. How can I do that? Because I believe in the ideals that the country was formed on. And I believe that that's something that we should strive for and we should work constantly to attain. If you are someone who feels like this country is perfect the way it is, has never done anything wrong, that's nationalism. Nationalism doesn't want you to learn your actual history because it thinks that will teach you to hate your nation. Nationalism is narrowing the definition of who is a true member of your nation. So these are things to think about. Okay? So our next speaker is going to be Samantha Elkins, who is going to talk about the fascist rise in Italy.
Wait, I can't use this one? Oh, I have to click. I don't have enough hands.
I mean, or you could just tell me and I could.
Yeah, I'll tell you. There we go. I even marked my paper. All right. So, Italy and the rise of fascism. So, when we're looking at the rise of fascism in Italy in the early 20th century, there's a ton of factors, honestly, that lead to its growth in Italy. Today, I'm just focusing on 3 because I've got a time limit. This could be a course, quite frankly. And so as I go into these, honestly, you're going to see a ton of the subcategories, even some of them that Karen already mentioned up here. And it's, quite frankly, also really difficult to separate out all of these different categories because there's a lot of crossover between them all. And keep in mind, people rarely do things for just one reason. Most of the times we have lots of different points. So if you go to the next slide for me, that would be great. So the first aspect, hey, look at this, of Italian fascism and the growth of Italian fascism is actually ultra-nationalism. So it's not even just nationalism, it is ultra-nationalism. But before I can get to that, I got to put this into context by more modern terms. Anybody remember in 2023 when there was that viral trend of girlfriends asking their boyfriends, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? Do you guys remember that going viral and everybody being really surprised that their boyfriends just randomly thought about the Roman Empire way more often than we expected? It's a thing. If you don't know what I'm talking about, man, I feel old, and that was in 2023. That was post-COVID. Well, it turns out there's kind of this question of like, why? Why are just guys interested in the Roman Empire? Well, there's probably a lot of different reasons, because once again, we don't do things just for one reason. There was some things like the engineering expertise that came out of the Roman Empire, literature, philosophy, architecture, all of this. Although a lot of people have looked at it and specifically also looked at the fact that there's those movies about gladiators. We all know what I'm talking about. And a lot of men, not all men, but a lot of men like these movies, and they kind of see the gladiators as kind of like the ideal of masculine strength and power and everything. Which I could then go into the patriarchal norms and everything like that, but I'm not going to do that today. Instead, I'm going to jump into basically whatever the reason is. Quite frankly, with this trend, you can actually apply this trend back in time to Italy, basically during that 19th and early 20th centuries. Basically, a lot of Italians kind of wanted to recall the Roman Empire. They were excited for that point in their history, and they wanted a reunification of all the former provinces of the Roman Empire. And the thing is, you see tons of different phases of this and dozens of terminology that's used to describe this during the 1800s that leads to like the various states of the Italian peninsula being reunified and some outlying islands and everything like that. But then later on you start seeing more of a politicized side of the movement, promoting specifically reunification where ethnic Italians were. And the fact that we have to bring ethnicity into the equation already starts showing us this concept of kind of othering the people who are not ethnic Italians. And therefore kind of putting on a pedestal Italian history and that identity as kind of like being the end goal, because Italians wanted to recall that idolized past, whether they're looking at like the Renaissance or going back way further to the Roman Empire in particular, where once again they're hopeful that Italy can become, the strongest military power of the world, but not just militarily, but like the strongest economically and culturally compared to everyone else. I don't have enough hands. So this brings us back to this term, ultra-nationalism. It's not just the pride in one's own country. I love that you had already talked about nationalism. I was like, there we go. It's taking that nationalism to a new extreme. A lot of times, ultra-nationalism will mythicize basically the past culture and therefore justify almost any action taken in the name of returning back to that past position. And in this case, that would be, the Roman Empire. And this is, quite frankly, the basis of a lot of the ideology that feeds into the uprising of the Italian Fascist Party and everything like that, but by no means is it the full equation. Would you mind going to the next slide, Dr. Wisely? Because context. World War I, the Great War, because they wouldn't have called it World War I. Nobody knew there was going to be a second one, though they probably should have guessed. Italy actually eventually joined the Allied side, which is the winning side of the war. So they're on the winner's side. But the thing is, what they expected, so you can see Italy before World War I, and then in the middle, this image is what Italy expects to gain from the war. So they're looking at kind of some of that ultra-nationalism expansion outward, and then the third image is what they actually get. They don't get near as much as what they expected. And so Italians literally refer to the outcome of this war as the mutilated victory. That is a specific rhetoric that is going to be used by Benito Mussolini, who becomes the leader of the Italian Fascist Party. That we failed in what we were, setting out to do. So now you can see how, this ideology is leading to the rise of fascism in Italy, but ultranationalism also becomes a core component within that Italian fascism. Basically, between World War I and World War II, the idea of conquering other places and incorporating them into Italy to bring back the Roman Empire, that was a big part of the fascist party, quite frankly. If you go to the next slide, thank you. Another aspect that really directly comes out of World War I, so you can start seeing how we're all crossing over here, is the post-Great War economy in Italy. Right at the end of the war, you get a lot of canceled war contracts, so there's just less jobs available. Plus you have all those Italian soldiers coming home and looking for work, and there's no work to be had. So basically, you have these high rates of unemployment, and that leads to a lot of discontent, of course, from the workers, but from just the Italian people themselves. Oh yeah, and you get inflation, and specifically inflation of your really basic cost of goods. Like the milk, bread, eggs kind of thing. So all of this economic unrest means people are looking for solutions. And oftentimes we start looking for simple solutions to complex problems, and we start turning to more extremist beliefs, quite frankly. And so we see an uptick in these extreme political beliefs in Italy during this time period. For instance, you can see up here with this chart, the number of strikes rises quite a bit during this time, labor union strikes, and a lot of these strikes were oftentimes violent. There's a lot more support for the Socialist Party, the far left. At this point, it was what they considered everything in Italy. And you have some socialists being more extreme than others, by all means, literally calling for, we've just seen the Russian Revolution happening, where they literally go in and they kill the Tsar and everything like that. And then, of course, you get these movies like Anastasia and everything coming out of that. But it's one of those things that, you have Italian socialists saying, we should get some of that here in Italy. So there's a lot of, violence spreading with this, which quite frankly kind of brings me to a third point that ends up overlapping a whole lot with the second, quite frankly. Go ahead, take the next one. I was like, who am I asking to do this? We have overall at this time a pretty weak government in Italy. And within this government and outside of the government, there's a lot of fear of the left. There's a lot of fear of these socialists. A lot of Italians join, actually, the fascist party in fear of the rise of these so-called radical socialists. They would join this new fascist party that's created by Benito Mussolini in 1919, and then later it's reorganized to actually be called the National Fascist Party in 2020. I'm sorry, oh my gosh. 1921. We are not in the 2020s. 1921. The thing is, if you look at early on the roots of this original fascist party and everything like that, it's way different than what it eventually becomes. Some of the root ideology they were calling for was things like, oh, we should have women's suffrage as well as male suffrage for all, which women weren't allowed to vote in Italy at that time, so I was like, oh, that's pretty radical. And they wanted to eliminate titles in the class and caste system. And so you actually look at this and you can go, this sounds a lot like socialism, quite frankly, which is not really that surprising because Benito Mussolini had been a socialist before World War I. He just got kicked out of the Socialist Party because the socialists were very much pacifists. They did not want to go to war. But Benito Mussolini, looking back at that ultranationalism, he had looked at World War I as an opportunity, basically, for Italy to basically, like, regain more territory and bring back the Roman Empire greatness as before. And so they were like, yeah, you're not part of the party anymore. But that's the thing, is right from the get-go, when he's establishing this, fascist party and everything, we do see that ultra-nationalist belief system being basically a core component of their political party. That they are okay with a violent means, a military violent means, to reach a greater end. Now, okay, let's be honest, 1919, they do not do well in elections. They almost fade away completely, and I actually learned something yesterday that apparently Mussolini, thought about, just quitting the whole thing and becoming a fiction writer. Feels like a weird alternate universe there. But he didn't. Instead, basically, they regrouped and they said, you know what we're going to try to do? We're going to move even further. Okay, you guys have this way. Even further to the right in our political ideology. And we're going to try again. And, we're going to start using some paramilitary violence, in particular against our political opponents, i.e. the Italian Socialist Party. Yeah. So the thing is, in 1919, you have a newly elected parliament, and they just, mentioned before, they're a weak government. They never could quite form a governing coalition that could really control and mediate between some of this extreme violence that's going on with laborers and really help the economy and everything like that. And so, which I should actually mention, the largest political party at this time really would have been the Socialist Party, quite frankly. And so Mussolini and it's called the Fasci, which is what it's called early on, they basically take advantage of this. All these strikes and violence that's happening, they basically in 1920 managed to convince a lot of business interests, landowners, industrialists, hey, you should start backing us with financial support for the fascist party because we will be able to really run against these socialists. And then simultaneously, you have these paramilitary militia groups going out and about. They're known as the Black Shirts. And these Black Shirts literally openly attack socialist groups. And they defend their actions saying, oh, we're just trying to defend the nation of Italy against communism. Kind of a callback to the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia and everything. We're just defending Italy by doing this. The Black Shirts, we have to keep in mind, they are specifically recruiting military veterans and former army officers. And then they're attacking these socialist headquarters and breaking up trade unions. These are very specific actions because on one hand, what you're already starting to see is they're othering the Socialist Party. They're trying to put them out there as the so-called bad guys. And furthermore, now we're seeing the Fasci have the backing of a lot of military. Now, Mussolini himself probably didn't have a lot of control over the Black Shirts, quite frankly. But the leaders of these different Black Shirts organizations going out and about, they supported Mussolini. And he's definitely going to utilize them to kind of show an image of strength for the Nationalist Party. Oh, there we go, back to ideals of patriarchy and everything like that. And so this brings us to the election of 1921. At that point, the fascists, are going to basically join in a governing coalition with Giovanni Giolitta. I said that wrong. Giovanni Giolitti. There we go. Got it right the second time. And the thing is, Giovanni, he is very conservative, and he is very, oh, look at this, fearful of the socialists. And so he basically joined forces with the Fascist Party, because he's going, this is going to help me have more control against the socialists, and he was actually probably hoping that it would kind of make Mussolini go, like, shape up and, like, get your kids in order, none of this, like, black shirts mess, come on, become a legitimate government. It doesn't do that. It does not do that at all. Which, by the way, it is literally when they joined this governing coalition that Mussolini openly admits that his political party is going to represent the far right. Like, he openly says, oh, we are the far right of Italy and everything. And so this was like an attempt to stabilize politics, but really it just gave the fascists more power. And specifically, it gave them legitimate power. So now, when you get violence from, like, the black shirts going out and attacking socialist groups and trade labor unions, it's basically sanctioned by the government. It's basically being approved of by, like, government entities like judges and police officers. Now, that being said, okay, let's be honest, like, the number of actual, like, members of the Fascist Party that have been elected into the Italian parliament in 1921 is pretty small. But Mussolini is one of those 35. And he is one of those elected fascist deputies, and this gets him a platform so he can have more influence to gain more traction with more people and more control. Plus, as a part of that coalition, he has immunity from prosecution. Can't face consequences. Now we're starting to see, oh, okay, now we're going towards more of that definition we've seen. Now, Mussolini initially wanted to take power, legitimately. Start putting quotation marks around things, but I don't have an extra hand. The thing is, others are wanting him to seize power much quicker. So for a time, we do see, like, the Fascist Party kind of, like, trying to play nice with the socialists. There's even some attempts to, like, dissolve the black shirts. It fails. That doesn't ever happen. And Mussolini really, in the meantime, is kind of coalescing that fascist party even more so. He's coalescing the nationalist program that more and more Italians are getting behind, like, yeah, we want to bring back when we were the Roman Empire. Going back to ultranationalism. And they rename their political party the National Fascist Party, which when you translate to Italian, it's the PNF. Go to the next slide. Which brings us to 1922. In 1922, we actually see the socialists in Italy try to set out and have an anti-fascist strike. And this ends up working out to the advantage of Mussolini because he basically says, hey, the government needs to stop this strike, and if the government doesn't step in and stop it, we, the PNF, will. Government doesn't step in. And so we see the Fascist Party in Italy literally stepping in, stopping this strike through whatever means necessary, so very violent and everything. But now they put themselves out there as like, oh, we're just the defenders of law and order. Once again, we're protecting Italy against the socialists. So that fear of the left, come back in again. Furthermore, when the Italian government just doesn't stop them at all, inaction basically is acceptance. It's support. So, now those fascists that really want Mussolini to actually be the prime minister of Italy, they step forward, and in October of 1922, which is what you can see pictured here, they march on Rome. The end goal is to take control of the government. Literally, the then prime minister will end up resigning from his position. He then asks the king of Italy, hey, can you sign this order where I can use like military violence against these fascists who are trying to basically do a coup and take over the government? And the king refuses to do so. And in this way, we see the king basically handing power over to Mussolini, making him be the new prime minister of Italy. And he is being supported specifically by that right wing, and by the military, and by the business classes. Now, why did the king do this? Why did he not try to stop Mussolini when this is clearly a grab for power? Well, most likely he feared the socialists more than he feared the fascists. Furthermore, he probably feared if he didn't hand it over to the fascists that it would cause an actual civil war to break out in Italy. Hey, look at that. Weak government fear of the world. Let me do the next slide. The thing is, basically for the next couple of years, the Fascist Party under Mussolini kind of plays nice, and they're a legitimate government. Please pick up on my air quotations, basically. And basically, they are democratic, but a lot of the democracy during that time has been really called into the question. Like, is it really democracy when you've got a gun being held to your head to vote one particular way? Probably not. And so basically, we see them dramatically modifying the power of the parliamentary system in this time. By 1924, they pretty much drop any pretense of democracy, and we see Mussolini turn into a full dictatorship. At that point, the PNF is the only legally permitted party in the country, and you get a full-on fascist regime in Italy. Mussolini at that point is El Duce, also known as the leader. So we see these aspects from today, basically, in the rise of Italian fascism, but then they become a lot of times core components of the fascism there itself. We're going to see Italy continues on with their ultranationalism. They use it as a rationale to turn towards much more imperialistic actions. They stress the state power over businesses, despite saying to the businesses, oh, we're going to be laissez-faire. And the business community was like, oh, we'll support you. And then it was like, psych. And finally, of course, you get the continuing othering of other people in Italy, especially the socialists. But you see this even more violently, quite frankly, when they do that ultranationalism and they start going in and invading places like Libya and Ethiopia. Their othering becomes much more violent in its nature, which, of course, you can't really take apart from race. So in this way, to conclude, Italy becomes a fascist nation. Yeah. Do you want me to? Up next, we have the wonderful Professor Lewis with the rise to fascism in Germany.
Can you hear me like this? I don't know how far I should hold this. Should I freestyle? I'm going to get on stage. I'm not tall enough for this. Oh, there's so much power up here. I think I should be a dictator. Just kidding. All right, good afternoon. Can you all hear me okay? You didn't have it right here, bossy. Is this better? Okay. All right, good afternoon. How's everybody? Okay, good. Well, you're about to not be good. Just kidding. I know it's cold. This will warm you up. So I'm Professor Cindy Lewis. I teach history here at TCC Northeast. Geez, that's close. And I am going to be talking to you about the Nazi regime, the rise of fascism in Germany. You recognize this guy, right? You've probably heard of him before. I call him Mr. Stupid Stash. That's what I call him. Slide, por favor. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so in Germany, Hitler and the Nazis manufactured their own special blend of fascism called Nazism, which centered on several key elements: nationalism, militarism, anti-Semitism, racism, a belief in the supposed superiority of the Aryan race-ism. There's lots of isms going on here. So Nazism becomes sort of its special blend, special flavor of fascism. All right. So economic and political instability in Germany after World War I created essentially an environment ripe for fascism. So first we have obviously the defeat in World War I and the Treaty of Versailles. Germany was the defeated nation, and in 1919 they're forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles, which essentially forced them to admit full guilt for the war. They had to hand over a lot of their territory. They had to pay heavy reparations to Allied nations, in addition to dismantling their military. So these elements, these stipulations of the Treaty of Versailles, eventually led to economic turmoil, hyperinflation, and just an economic mess in Germany. Matters only get worse for Germany with the onset of the Great Depression, an economic crash in the 1930s. So it obviously magnifies that economic crisis that Germany was already facing. And this leads to, unfortunately, mass unemployment, widespread poverty across Germany. Now, meanwhile, political instability and government ineffectiveness only magnified these economic issues, right? In addition to this, many Germans resented the Weimar Republic, which was a democratic republic. Many blamed them for accepting the Treaty of Versailles in the first place, right? Which they thought was the cause of most of Germany's economic problems by this point. The Republic also suffered from a lack of strong leadership and failed to effectively deal with these economic issues. When people are hungry, that's their top priority, and they have a government that is not addressing those issues, okay? So this leads to popular discontent and opposition. So these realities caused many Germans to lose faith in the Weimar Republic and made them susceptible to political extremism. Again, when people are hungry and facing homelessness, they are susceptible to taking these more extreme stances, okay? Now, as a result of this, many groups start to materialize to challenge the Weimar Republic. Some of them are socialist, some of them are fascist, communist, but there's a lot of opposition starting to gather in Germany. Slide, por favor. Now, one of these parties that forms to challenge the Weimar Republic is the National Socialist. Don't be fooled, don't get it twisted, they're not very socialist. The National Socialist German Workers' Party, more commonly known as the Nazi Party, right? Now, the reason why the Nazi Party becomes the most successful of these groups to challenge the Weimar Republic can probably be credited to Mr. Stupid Stash himself, Adolf Hitler, right? So, Adolf Hitler, I do need more hands. Maybe we should expose ourselves to radiation and grow. Don't do that, okay? Don't do that. So Adolf Hitler was a native of Austria, and he was a World War I veteran, and he joined the Nazi Party in 1919. And by 1920, he was appointed head of the party's propaganda wing. What is propaganda? Somebody tell me what propaganda is, please. Yeah, that's a good way to say it, right? You're advertising sort of your beliefs and ideology, right? So Hitler becomes responsible for advertising Nazi Party beliefs and ideology. So Hitler used this position as head of the propaganda wing to his full advantage. It's important for us to know that Adolf Hitler was extremely nationalistic, and he was extremely anti-Semitic. And he argued that pretty much all of Germany's problems were caused by two central elements, Jews and communists, right? He said it all boils down to a mass conspiracy caused by these two groups, right? Now, he shares all of these views through the party newspaper and through regular party meetings, so he has ample opportunity to disseminate his personal beliefs and his ideologies, okay? Now, not everyone early on in the Nazi Party agreed with Hitler. That's important. He had opposition at first. But because the party's funding and their publicity depended so much on Adolf Hitler's actions as head of that propaganda wing, his critics relented. They kind of threw their hands up, stepped back, and let him do his thing because he was bringing in funding. He was bringing in new members. So they relented. They fell back and let him do what he was doing. Now, it was also during this time that Adolf Hitler acquired a loyal following among other Nazis, including Rudolf Hess and Hermann Göring. And I know I'm mispronouncing their words because I'm a Texan and I don't speak German. And also they're Nazis, so I don't really care to get their names that right. You know, other Germans, I will try my best to get their names right. I don't care about properly pronouncing Nazi names. Anyway, so by November of 1923, Hitler and other Nazis were ready to take over the government. And they attempted to overthrow the German government by force in what becomes known as the Beer Hall Push. Now, their revolution was a failure. They're actually pushed back by Munich police. Hitler and several other Nazis are arrested. They're charged with high treason, and they're thrown in prison. And that's the end of the story for Adolf Hitler. Nay, nay, don't believe that. Because it's really in prison where Adolf Hitler starts to stew, and he has some time to think and work out and get prison tats, right? Well, while he's in prison, he starts work on his manifesto, his autobiography, Mein Kampf. Great read. It's not great. But it was very influential, okay? So in this work, Mein Kampf, Hitler outlines his political ideology and his plan for Germany. In this work, Hitler continues to blame all of Germany's struggles on Judaism and communism, and he outlines his plan to restore Germany to its former glory. In other words, he wants to make Germany fantastic again, okay? He also wants to create a German empire for the so-called superior German Aryan race. The Aryan race doesn't really exist, but Hitler believed in it full force. Now, he believed that there were three central elements to this plan: an authoritarian government, territorial acquisition, and racial and ethnic cleansing, right? So these were the three central components in Hitler's mind to make Germany wonderful again, okay? Okay, no, don't you do it yet. So after his time in prison, Hitler and his followers realized that power could and probably should be attained through the electoral system. So they decide then that instead of using force, they're going to use the proper channels to achieve power. The Nazi Party then used widespread propaganda campaigns to garner public support. And during this, they really tap into the desperation felt by those hungry, cold, homeless German people, right, who are already susceptible, they're already desperate, and the Nazi Party taps into that. So by 1932, the Nazi Party held a solid majority in the German parliament, which is called the Reichstag. See, this is why I left out the Reichstag. I don't like it. German parliament, right? So kind of like our Congress. So they have a majority in the German Congress, essentially. So Hitler uses the party's standing in German parliament to secure his spot as Chancellor of Germany in 1933. He's got the votes, right? They vote him into this position of Chancellor of Germany in 33. And at that point, he begins consolidating his power, all through legitimate channels, right? And he also uses the elimination of his political opponents. If you agreed with him, you're out. And also alienating or removing internal rivals, right? Now, by 1934, Hitler becomes Führer of Germany, which makes him the ultimate leader of Germany, practically with unlimited authority over all aspects of German life. So he has ultimate control over the government, media, education, propaganda, all of it, all aspects of German life. Now, it's important to remember then, the lesson here is that Hitler and the Nazi regime began their ascent to power through legitimate electoral processes. And they used political maneuvering to completely dismantle a democracy and replace that democracy with a fascist state. That's important for us to remember, right? Slide, por favor. Thank you. Now, once firmly in control, Hitler began pursuing the goals that he had laid out in his beautifully, eloquently written Mein Kampf. He began rebuilding the military and taking territory by force to acquire living space for the so-called Aryan master race. And these efforts, these land grabs, eventually lead directly to World War II. And Hitler was well aware of that. He welcomed that. The Nazis also initiated their plans to eliminate political enemies and those deemed inferior, particularly Jews. Okay? The goal was to biologically improve, and biologically improve the German people by eliminating people and elements that were deemed undesirable. Now, Nazi eugenics aimed to weed out these so-called undesirable people and biological traits, and as part of these efforts, the Nazis adopted forced sterilization and euthanasia programs. These programs targeted individuals with various mental and physical, again, disabilities, right? And I used the bunny ears there because the Nazis had a very loosey-goosey definition of what was considered a disability, okay? Now, these things included schizophrenia, depression, autism, asthma, blindness, deafness, cerebral palsy, homosexuality. All of those things, according to Nazism, were disabilities and needed to be removed from the human race, okay? Now, through these programs, more than 400,000, and I know that's a big number that it's difficult for us to wrap our heads around. The numbers get bigger, unfortunately. But more than 400,000 people were forced sterilized. They were sterilized against their will. And roughly 300,000 people were murdered, and we can call it that because that's what it was, were murdered through the T4 euthanasia program. So they were either forcibly sterilized or they were killed outright, all as part of this Nazi plan to perfect the Aryan race, to weed out these so-called weaknesses. Okay. The Nazis placed special emphasis on the persecution and elimination of the Jews. Nazi persecution of Jewish people began with removing Jews from the government and from university positions. The revocation of Jewish citizenship soon followed. These anti-Semitic laws and propaganda that were pumped out pretty constantly by the Nazi regime made the oppression and violent acts against Jewish people socially acceptable, right? It became so commonplace that most Germans either looked the other way or some even participated. So it became so socially acceptable that ordinary German citizens began to participate in these anti-Jewish actions. I don't want to read this next part, it's so sad. But I have to. The treatment of German Jews began to become increasingly violent, and eventually it evolved into what the Nazis called the final solution, a plan to systematically eliminate the Jewish population entirely, right? So it wasn't just an accident, it wasn't happenstance, and it wasn't meant to be partial. It was meant to be all-out annihilation of these people. Now, of course, this eventually becomes known as the Holocaust, okay? Jews and other groups who did not fit Nazi ideas of German racial purity, and these groups included the Roma, Slavic people, Russians, blacks, gay people, people with physical and mental, again, disabilities, were rounded up and they were sent off to Nazi concentration camps or extermination camps. So by the end of the war, the Nazi regime systematically murdered over 17 million people. Take a minute. Can you picture 17 million of anything? That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people wiped off the face of the earth, right? That number includes roughly 6 million Jews, and this was done through gas chambers at the extermination camps, mass shooting operations where the SS would go out and gather up a group of men, women, children, elderly, and they would take them out into the woods and just shoot them. Or they would pull over on the side of the road and just shoot them and throw them into a mass grave. And they did this all over Europe. So mass shooting operations and through deliberate privation, disease, and brutal treatment. Because those concentration camps weren't five-star hotels, right? The goal of those was to slowly work these individuals to death. So the end result was the same thing, right? Next slide, please. The Nazi terror came to an end in May 1945. By that point, the Nazis were fighting a losing battle, and the Allies were very quickly approaching. Not just any allies either. When the Soviet Red Army marched into Berlin, Hitler and several of his high-ranking henchmen committed suicide. They did the self-checkout. They did not want to face the wrath of the Soviet Red Army. Now, days later, with their leadership dead or quickly scurrying off to Argentina, Germany surrendered, and the Nazi regime came to an end. Over the course of its 12-year existence, the Nazi regime wrought devastation not only to Europe, but across the world. And remember, it all started with these legitimate democratic electoral processes, okay? Next slide, please. Now, what lessons can we learn from the Nazi regime? What lessons can we take from the rise of fascism in Italy and in Germany? Well, first, desperate times, desperate measures. Times of economic and political hardship may make people susceptible to extremism, as in post-World War I Germany, right? People are desperate. They are looking for some kind of relief. If your children are hungry, right, you're looking for some kind of relief, some kind of savior. Propaganda. Authoritarian movements like the Nazis take control of the media, and they use propaganda to spread misinformation, instill fear, and manipulate public opinion. Political apathy. Many Germans underestimated Hitler, thinking that he would be moderate once in power. There's no way he'll do those things he actually said he's going to do, right? That's outlandish. They believed that Hitler could be contained by these democratic processes if needed. They believed they had a system of government in place that could contain Adolf Hitler. Others were simply indifferent, or they believed that politics didn't directly impact their lives. Okay? So that's a big one. Nationalism and scapegoating. The Nazis, like many other authoritarian regimes, exploit nationalistic sentiments. And the Nazis specifically blamed Jews, communists, and other groups for Germany's problems. They used an us versus them mentality to unify their supporters. They're the enemy. It's their fault, okay? How much time do we have? Thank you. You're on top of it. I won't use my kitten analysis. It's okay. Protecting democracy. The Weimar Republic had weak institutions that the Nazis were able to dismantle all legally. Right? They didn't have to break any rules. They didn't have to break any constitution. They did it all legitimately. Hitler used, once in power, he used his emergency powers, such as the Enabling Act, to further consolidate his rule, giving him ultimate power. And again, all through these official channels. Finally, moral courage. And I think this is really important. Many Germans did oppose the Nazis and did oppose the Nazi regime, but they feared speaking out. What are the consequences if you speak out against people who are very clearly willing to murder? It's scary. Some resisted, but many either complied or they just remained silent, right? So that moral courage is an important aspect when we're talking about authoritarian regimes and fascism. Next slide, please. Now, on that topic, I'll leave you with this, a quote from the late, great Sir Winston Churchill. And he says, "An appeaser is one who feeds a crocodile hoping it will eat him last." Right? Do we all understand what he means by that? Right? It doesn't matter how charming the crocodile is. It doesn't matter what the crocodile promises you or how much riz the crocodile has, right? That's charisma for you old folks. The crocodile at the end of the day is a crocodile, and he only cares about his own appetite, right? And eventually, we all become lunch, okay? We all become lunch. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to open up the floor now for some questions. If you have any questions, please raise your hand and we will do our best to answer.
When the National Socialist German Workers' Party took power, what was the point of them adopting the title socialism, other than, obviously, the government seized the means of production, but they did not operate with a socialist economy or as a socialist government?
Do you have an answer for that? Because I know Pocket does.
Hear me? National Socialism was something that was adopted in Austria, and it was purposely meant to be misleading. National Socialism is not regular socialism. Socialism is not even communism. Socialism is the retaining of private property and then a gradual reforming of certain things. So in Austria, they used the term National Socialism to try to draw in people thinking it was socialistic, but then indoctrinating them with a more nationalistic, more fascist position. So it's intentional. They're not socialist. I know the internet says they are socialists, but they're not. Does that help? Yeah.
Okay. Do I use this?
It's just speak into this.
Okay. Do I push the button?
No, it's screen. Go.
Okay, I'm just wondering because a lot of this sounds really familiar with America right now, like the early stages of this. I'm just wondering, what's your opinion about that? Because everything you're saying is currently getting really like scary when you start thinking about it. Because right now, I feel like I'm not trying to put a whole bunch of hate on our government or anything. I've tried to stay neutral for the most part, but I feel like a lot of the things we're talking about are happening right now, and I'm wondering, like, what are we doing about that? What's our opinions on that, and do we have a backup plan to explain this to other people before it's too late?
I think Dr. Karen Wisely should answer that.
Thanks. I would say this is part of the backup plan here is making you guys aware of what happened there so that it won't happen here. And I appreciate that you say that you want to remain neutral, but I think that maybe we are approaching a time where that's not possible. Moral courage is needed, and it's something that we need to probably hold on to, okay?
And sometimes you have to get over your fear of consequences. I think that's what stops a lot of people.
I mean, we're all going to die someday.
Sure.
And if I may add one little thing to that, one of my favorite anonymous quotes, and this is something that's very important for us to remember, is...
Adam Guerrero.
Oh, yes. Hi, also faculty in the history department. Stupidity, tyranny, and fanaticism are only defeated by the free mind. So education is important, right? And paying attention to our government, making sure that we are aware of, yes, we can draw connections, sure. Each event is its own time and its own place, but again, that's why these discussions are important. So that way, if you do have concerns, well, have moral courage.
Because democratic societies require active participation. Like, we don't actually think of that a lot because we think, oh, we just got to vote and then we go about our business. But democratic systems require you to pay attention and be involved and challenge laws you don't like. And when you don't, that's when they do what they want, right? I mean, that's any state. Any state, any government, any system of power can do what they want if you aren't actively involved in it. And that's an evergreen, I think, kind of statement.
Was Germany as aware of what was happening to them with the fascists rising as we are of what's going on right now? Like, we're all well aware of that our democracy is under attack and it's going down in flames. Did they have the same level of awareness?
I think it's the desperation. Well, there's a multiple dynamics. They already hate Jews. And that's like hundreds and hundreds of years of hating Jews. So it's a very easy connection. I mean, I'm sure there are some. There are people fleeing at certain times, but it's what Professor Lewis said. They're preying on their desperation. That's why dictators rise when economic downturns occur or when things are rough, is because they'll promise you the moon. And when you're desperate, you will. There's also the pride of losing that war and feeling like they took the bad end of this, because the Germans did not start World War I, right? It was Austria, Serbia, and they're taking a lot of blame for things they didn't do, and those soldiers are the ones they're preying on. Like the soldiers coming back home are the ones that these political parties, like the Nazi Party, are preying on. They're preying on their despair, they're preying on that feeling. So I'm sure there are, because there always are. But I think people want it to be real. So there's a little bit of justifying things to yourself, which is a human behavior, right? But I think there's some of that. So yeah, there are, but not enough to stop it. Let me say that.
And I think that also brings us to the question of if the argument or the theory is that there's something similar going on now, which I'm not saying there is, okay? No, I don't know. How many people are aware of it? Right? The question is, how informed are most people about these patterns and what may or may not be taking place right now, right? You may see something, but others might see it as an opportunity to make money or improve their current situation, right? So it's a question of who's aware now of, right? So, you shut up, I don't want to get fired.
Yeah, so I would encourage, because the assumption is that we all know what's going on, but we don't. Go out there and talk to people. A lot of people don't even realize what's happening. They haven't seen the news in quite some time. It's too depressing. It is, but it is your duty to know what's going on in your country, or you won't have a country. So you have to be engaged and talk to your friends, talk to your coworkers, talk to your, about getting them engaged, your classmates. It can't just be the teacher standing up there saying, hey, did you see what happened in the news yesterday? And crickets. Okay? So pay attention a little bit. I mean, you don't have to immerse yourself in it. That is depressing. That will, affect your day-to-day life. But look at it. Be aware. Find a trusted source and be aware. Talk to me afterwards if you want a trusted source.
I think, to your point, I think there's a definite, and we see that now. We see that regardless of your political opinions on the last election and who's in office now. If you see people who genuinely are struggling financially in the economy, and you see people who want to improve that, but we also have to remind ourselves at what cost does that come. In the lecture, we hear about we need to improve Germany, we need living space, we need to improve our own economy, we don't need to be in debt to these other nations, but it was at the cost of the German population, a large part of the German population, and we see that now. Now we hear, which is very similar, regardless of your political opinions, yeah, you don't have a job, it's hard to find work, it's because an immigrant has your job. Now we hear the price of eggs are too high, it's someone's fault. And we're hearing that constantly of not only is this a problem, but you need someone to blame, and I'm the only one who knows how to fix that because I'll deal with them, so vote for me. And I think that's a very big problem, regardless of your political opinion, of pitting us against one another and ignoring the problems that are coming from the top down. If they're able to tell us, hate thy brother, then they are able to stay in power. And I think we see those themes repeating. History doesn't necessarily repeat, but it sure as hell rhymes, excuse my language. And I think we're seeing a lot of those things, and I think the only, people who are blind to the past are doomed to repeat it in the future, and I think we're seeing that now more than ever, because some people just don't care to do their own research.
Yep, fun days to be a historian. Yeah, we've got a lot of questions over here. I don't know who's first, so we're just going to go from the front to the back, if that's all right.
What was the impact of religion on these movements and the rise of them?
There's a little one up there you want to answer. Religion is oftentimes used as a way to separate as well, is what I would say. So that's part of it. Who else had their hand up? Someone?
Hello. Oh, there's the microphone. I was like, I don't see a microphone. It's separate. I can answer a little bit with Italy. Italy is very interesting because in many ways the totalitarianism that happens in Italy, I describe it as diet totalitarianism. It doesn't have some of the same violence that you see in some of the other places, but with religion, it's very interesting because they actually utilize it to their power, because there was a lot of problems with the Vatican at that point in time, and we actually see it's under Mussolini. He actually makes a deal, and you get the formation of the Vatican State, which is the smallest country in the entire world. And so it's seen as like, oh, this is proof of our strength on some level because we've made a deal that others couldn't do before us. And it's interesting because they do the same thing with basically the Italian mafia by putting them in legitimate positions of power, but that's not religion, but yeah. We defeated the mafia by giving them positions of power in our government. So, same kind of thing.
And the Nazis used religion as part of their spiel, but it was superficial, and they really only embraced it as much as they did because they were anti-communist and the communists were atheists. So either way, it's a tool for them.
I just wanted to add, as you said, sometimes neutrality or being in the middle, we think that is fair, but that only helps oppressors and not victims. So sometimes we need to stand and make a choice. So I think these discussions are good because it makes us think. And I think nowadays it is very important for us to educate ourselves, and trying to understand what's going on and take a step and make a choice on where am I going to stand and why am I going to support.
Good point. All right. Anybody else? Your question?
So I'm curious, throughout history, it seems like these quote-unquote far-left ideologies have been the only ones that are a serious threat to fascism. So why do you think that is, for one? And for two, does that have anything to do with today's demonization of communism in America?
I'll offer a partial answer to that. I think one of the reasons why the far left is villainized as it is because it does threaten the power structure. It threatens the hierarchy, and a lot of that boils down to money. A lot of the things that are embraced by the so-called far left are equalizers in terms of economic equity and opportunity, and those are threats to usually the powers that be. So it's kind of villainized. That's a simplified answer.
I can add a little bit to that with a specific point with Italy. Literally, early on in Mussolini's talks with the fascist party, he talks about specifically using laissez-faire techniques again, so that it's very much hands-off government. We're going to let the businesses grow, and it's that, oh, we're protecting you from the socialists who want to overthrow you and literally take power away from you. And so he's playing on the people who already have power within Italian society. And then he pulls the rug out from underneath them once he's El Duce, and the state takes power.
It's kind of like promising the masses that he has your best interests at heart in terms of things like grocery prices and living expenses and things like that. And then once power is grabbed, we go back to that old argument of what benefits the power structure and what threatens the power structure, and then everybody at the bottom, the ordinary people, the rug is pulled out from under, right? So, yeah, I'm getting depressed.
We want to add a little bit to this part of your question that said, the use of communism as a word, as an attack word in America. Well, the roots go deep because there's already this fundamental fear of it, even before the Bolshevik Revolution. So you have, even before Marx, there's a fear of the masses and of communism.
People living in communes and taking care of each other is terrifying to power structures that, yeah. Right, yeah.
So even before the Bolshevik Revolution, you have a conscious effort to use reform as appeasement to prevent further radicalization. But then the Cold War is where that talking point gets propaganded to the max, right? Because we're us versus them. And that's when you get Pledge of Allegiance. That's when you get In God We Trust. And so, yeah, all of that is part of it, to be the opposite.
It's not been always been there. It's just in the 1950s that stuff was added. And it was to basically accentuate the differences between us and the communists, the godless communists over there in Russia. And what Russia practices isn't even really communism. So
The only example we have is a dictatorship.
yeah. So it's gotten, and the problem is that it's a lot of people, what's that? No, it's a dictatorship as well, yeah. The problem is that a lot of people, it's the problem of everything. A lot of people know a very thin amount of things and not in-depth in enough things. So you use words like socialism, communism, Marxism, and you use them interchangeably, and they are not interchangeable. There are very definite differences between all of those things. But if you want to demonize the idea of sharing resources and things like that and not letting just a thin slice of the top get wealthy off of them, then you are seen as a communist, no matter what. So I would say go to your classes, ask a lot of questions, pay attention, and learn. Educate yourselves.
I'm going to add one thing. Come to our events in the future. We will continue to have events like this and radar events, and thank you all for coming, too.
Be curious. Really be curious. And that's good for life in general, not just things like this. All right?
Thank you all for coming, and don't forget to fill out the Red Square evaluation. Thank you. Have a great day.